Hello everyone, today I'm going to introduce you to the hottest handheld console on the market right now, the engineering sample of the Lenovo Legion Go 2nd Gen. This device is the Z2E 16GB version. I was supposed to release this video earlier, but I really wanted to get the 32GB version because it allows for better video memory adjustment and more extensive testing. But on the second-hand market, I got stood up by the market twice and the price surged from under 4K to almost 6K. Therefore, it's highly improbable that I'll acquire the 32GB version in the near future. So for now, I can only provide a concise overview using this 16GB model. This engineering sample was manufactured in December of last year, and its level of completion is already remarkably high. This was likely prepared for a trade show early this year. I must make it clear that the section I'm introducing now does not represent the final product's performance, although it offers significant reference value. First, let me state my conclusion. The Lenovo Legion Go 2nd Gen will be an extremely competitive product, particularly regarding its hardware design. The first generation was actually a very forward-thinking attempt, but it did have a significant number of major flaws, which have been significantly improved in the second generation. Regarding the software aspect, it's certainly been a contentious issue, but the second generation has brought about some notable improvements, although there's still plenty of room for further enhancement. When discussing handheld gaming devices, several crucial factors consistently come up. Firstly, the APU, secondly, the amount of RAM, and finally, the battery capacity. Why won't I mention the hard drive? That's because SSDs are generally designed to be removable. If some unethical product manager were to use a soldered-on SSD, I'm quite certain they would be constantly criticized by netizens for many years to come. The second generation Legion has three distinct APU versions: the Z2 Go, followed by the Z2, and also the Z2E version with 16GB and 32GB memory. From the specs, the Z2E is like the 370 and the Z1E is like the 7840. On paper, it's an upgrade from the 12CU 780M to the 16CN 890M, and it also changes from RDNA 3 to 3.5. This advancement translates to enhanced graphics processing capabilities, or alternatively, it implies you can attain similar performance with significantly reduced power consumption, which is a crucial advantage. Battery capacity upgraded from 49.2 watt-hours to 74 watt-hours, roughly a 50% increase. Of course, this means the whole machine will be heavier. The dimensions of the second generation console will be slightly shorter than the first generation, yet it's both wider and thicker. The display remains 8.8 inches. However, it has transitioned from a 2K IPS screen to a 1080p OLED. Some individuals might perceive this as a step backward, but I personally consider it a more judicious decision. Choice. Firstly, the previous generation Z1E simply couldn't handle 2K resolution, and I'm not even sure the Z2E would be adequate. Therefore, opting for 1080p is undoubtedly a more practical decision. OLED panels inherently offer extended standby times, and when combined with the inclusion of variable refresh rate support, consequently, the enhancements made to the display on this device are expected to lead to a very substantial boost in its battery life and standby duration. On the console itself, you'll clearly see that its ports, buttons, and air vents have all been redesigned. Compared to the first generation, the air vent is noticeably larger, and the power button is also significantly bigger. This is something that allows you to have different lighting displays depending on the mode you are in. For example, it's red when in turbo mode. From the perspective of the interfaces, they both have two Type-C ports, along with a headphone jack and an SD card slot. However, what sets it apart from the first generation is that the Type-C port and the 3.5mm jack have been relocated to the bottom. Alright, this is primarily because the top section was already quite occupied, making this move a practical compromise. Some users might have found the fan on the first generation to be a bit loud and the cooling to be less than optimal. However, based on my personal experience with the device, I've found that the second generation's fan cooling is exceptionally powerful. It even maintains a relatively low noise level even when running in turbo mode, which I believe is a significant advantage and a definite selling point. From an aesthetic standpoint, the most significant change is actually the controller. While I don't own a first generation unit, for the purpose of this video, I went ahead and acquired a pair of first gen controllers. There are three primary criticisms often leveled against the first gen controller. Firstly, it has fewer buttons specifically, only 2 buttons located on this side. When compared to the new one, compared to the ROG and the second generation controller, this functionality is indeed missing, which means your gaming experience will definitely be impacted to some extent. The second point I want to mention is about its D-pad. It's not raised quite high enough, and the tactile feedback is really just average, which led to significant criticism back then. And then, another issue, the third one, is that the edge of the grip is too straight. This means that if you use it for extended periods, it tends to dig uncomfortably into your hand. The second generation has perfectly addressed these issues, and the skin-like texture on the controller feels incredibly comfortable. I truly hope they retain this design in future iterations. Currently, one of the engineering sample controllers has a glossy finish, which, in my opinion, compromises both its visual appeal and tactile sensation. It doesn't feel as good as this skin-like one. Is not as good as this skin-like one. Then there's a very unique upgrade, which is an extra Type-C port added here. Although when I was doing the battery life test, the main console ran out of power while both controllers still had 70 to 80% battery left. But having an extra Type-C port is ultimately a good thing on both sides. Yes, it has that feature, but I'm not sure if this is a feature that will only be available on the engineering sample version, or if it will be retained when it goes into mass production, so I don't know about that yet. Okay, and another thing I think is pretty considerate is that both generations, the controllers for both generations are universally compatible. This means I can connect the first generation controller to the second generation console. Of course, I haven't yet tried whether the second generation controller can be connected to the first generation console, and the first generation accessories can actually still be used as well. With these significant enhancements, I truly believe the Lenovo Legion Go is currently among the most powerful machines on the market regarding input methods, particularly its controller. Firstly, you can use the touchscreen for direct input. Secondly, you also have the option to connect a keyboard and mouse through a Type-C connection or via Bluetooth. Tooth to connect external keyboard and mouse devices for input. Thirdly, as you can also observe, it includes a trackpad. This trackpad has a pressure-sensitive function that allows you to click down. You can rest your finger on it, then press and hold for approximately 2 seconds. Currently, it seems a little, well, less responsive than ideal, but the vibration effect is quite noticeable. I'm not sure if you can hear the biz sound in the video, but hopefully you can pick it up. And perhaps the most crucial, or rather the most engaging aspect, is the innovative input method of this controller. You have the option to keep the controller attached and then prop up the kickstand. Alternatively, you can effortlessly detach it, as it comes right off with ease. For this demonstration, I'll be using the first generation model to illustrate this feature. Then you can use a connector like this to link them together, and hey, it becomes a controller just like a Switch, allowing you to operate it in that way. And what's even more interesting, the right controller for both the first and second generation models is truly quite special. Just look here, what 2 additional features does it boast? 2 extra buttons, explicitly labeled N. And what else do we find right here? A scroll wheel. That's why this is truly a marvelous aspect. Then, with the addition of this small attachment, click, clack, it transforms into what? It becomes a mouse, and this particular mouse. How is that accomplished? How do you switch between the controller and the mouse? There is a so-called FPS mode here. If you activate this FPS mode, then this controller essentially transforms into a mouse. Of course, the way you grip it is quite different from a regular controller. You typically hold it in this manner, and then if you were to change to the mouse, you'd have to hold it in the opposite direction. Then these 2 buttons would become your left and right click, and you'd also have the scroll wheel. Of course, many people might feel that this feature requires a bit of getting used to, and that's absolutely true. For me personally, playing in FPS mode, which is its intended function, I'm still not entirely accustomed to it when playing first-person shooter games. However, I believe it probably just needs a period of adaptation to become familiar with it. And then the one on the left, in FPS mode, this joystick on the left side, when you push it upwards, it then becomes W, then A, S, W, and D. So, as you can probably imagine, that's how you operate it. and because it has this particular accessory, it makes sliding much more comfortable. However, the second generation model doesn't currently come with this accessory, so I can only use the first generation one for this demonstration. The second generation is somewhat compatible, given that its contact surface is also flat. It is also flat here, it's just that without an accessory like this, the overall sliding experience, I feel there's still, quite a significant difference.
Okay, so some of you might be wondering, won't this be uncomfortable to hold? Well, actually it's detachable, so once it's removed, you won't experience that discomfort. Okay. Then again, some people might wonder, hey, I want to use this handheld gaming device as a temporary laptop. Is that even feasible? The answer is yes, it absolutely is. All you need to do is bring a Bluetooth keyboard like this one, and you can transform this handheld gaming device into a working office PC. This is really quite interesting because on the one hand, you can detach it, and then at that point, you can even turn it into a mouse. Oh, let's see, the FPS mode. Okay, the FPS mode is... The mode is now active, and this side functions as a mouse. Everyone can see it, but without that function or the proper base, it won't be especially comfortable to use. And this here just opens up as the keyboard. Alright, so at this point, we can check out what its approximate weight is. I happen to have a handheld gaming device right here. Alright, let's go ahead and take a look at it. The main unit's weight is 723 grams, and that's just the main console. If we add with both controllers attached, it comes to 936 grams, which is nearly a kilogram. And then, if you include a keyboard, it's 1.1. Actually, 113 grams, or rather 114 grams, so roughly 1.1 kilograms. Alright, at this point, let's go ahead and check how much this particular item weighs. This unit weighs 630 grams. That means the weight of just this main console alone is greater than the total weight of the other entire device. So, as you can probably imagine, there's actually a pretty noticeable and significant difference in the weight. Now, what many of you are probably most interested in is the performance testing of the graphics card. But before we get into those performance tests, let's first discuss the front-end software capabilities between these two distinct machines. So, what exactly is the primary distinction in the front end? It lies in its usability, in how it's actually used. Before getting my hands on this Legion Go 2, I had experience with two other handheld gaming devices. One was a ROG, and the other was a Switch. I honestly never considered front-end software to be that significant, but then I started using Legion software, and it completely changed my perspective. I came to understand that front-end software, it actually turns out to be quite important. Hey, let me show you all something quickly. If we press them simultaneously, it's very clear that the ROG has a much faster response speed. And, well, this becomes even more obvious when you look at it and you'll see my apologies, I misspoke. You can see that when you bring up a control center like this, the ROG speed is clearly and significantly quicker. Right? This latency is something Lenovo needs to continuously improve and optimize. This is because the software aspect, in contrast to the hardware, can be refined. Once hardware is manufactured, it's quite challenging to modify it, but software offers flexibility for ongoing enhancements. However, to achieve this improvement, you have to continually put in effort, find superior engineers, and conduct more rigorous tests. So, it really comes down to a matter of true commitment. I think. Lenovo has already made certain improvements in the past. They are showing commitment, but can they do better? I think this is where their greater commitment will be tested. Okay, so earlier, I conducted some straightforward performance tests. Under identical testing conditions, with the ROG Ally in its handheld gaming device mode, when performing a 25-watt test, I specifically used Black Myth, Wukong for the assessment. I ran a test, and its frame rate was approximately 64 frames per second. When the device is plugged in and drawing up to 30 watts of power, it can reach that 64 FPS. However, in this particular state, the entire machine also gets very hot, and the fan noise is quite loud. On the other hand, the Legion Go 2, when operating in its performance mode, achieves a higher 67 frames per second. Oh. It feels like the actual performance difference isn't as significant as the specifications might suggest. Naturally, this could be due to my current system being a test setup. However, when I later switched to balance mode, which is said to operate at just 15 watts, this device still achieved an impressive 56 frames per second. Therefore, you can certainly envision the implications. At 25 watts, or let's say 25 watts, this machine's battery life is just over an hour. However, with this particular device, when operating in turbo mode at 30 watts, I was able to play Black Myth Wukong for more than 2 hours, and surprisingly, there was still approximately 20% of the battery remaining. If I use the balance mode at just 15 watts, I can undoubtedly play for 3 to 4 hours straight. This kind of improvement is truly evident, and it's attributed to the OLED screen with VRR, the highly efficient Z2E processor, and the substantial 74 watt-hour battery. At this point, I actually intended to... I'd like to share some of my personal thoughts with all of you. Firstly, when it comes to handheld gaming devices, the larger the screen, the better the visual display. A bigger screen and higher resolution also demand greater processing capability, which means you'll need more robust cooling and a larger battery. Given this trend, the weight of these devices is only going to keep increasing. However, there must be a practical limit to screen size. If the screen reaches over 10 inches, wouldn't that simply make it a compact laptop? Therefore, in my estimation, 8.8 inches appears to be a relatively extreme dimension. Continuously holding a device of this particular size and substantial weight would undoubtedly become uncomfortable. The option of utilizing a detachable, the controller design, in my opinion, is currently the most comprehensive and optimal solution. I've seen many manufacturers try dual screens or laptop-style forms with an attached controller, but personally, I'm not very optimistic about them. In fact, their sales have been unremarkable, and they depreciate rather significantly in the second-hand market. However, for all-in-one handheld gaming devices, its component layout allows for much greater flexibility. For example, its battery and motherboard can be higher, offering more choices. You see, it can be very wide and even extend into the space beneath the handles. It can even be made thinner. Look at this ROG Ally. Its speaker performance is better. Why? Because its speakers are right here, on the handles. Now, its speakers are positioned at the top. So, you can clearly see that numerous compromises were necessary here. I firmly believe these trade-offs are perfectly acceptable. In actuality, the first generation's fundamental concept and overall direction were quite solid, but the original design certainly presented ample opportunities for substantial improvement and refinement. This encompasses its cooling system, its battery, and also its controllers. The second generation has undeniably brought substantial improvements in these areas, and therefore, I personally feel highly satisfied with the overall hardware design of this second iteration. However, in the rather niche handheld gaming device market, pricing continues to be of utmost importance. The first generation Ally, initially sold for over $3,000, offered you the flexibility to exchange its 40 watt-hour battery for a 70 watt-hour one, and even provided services to upgrade its 16 gigabytes of memory to 32 gigabytes, though I really don't think that's essential. Also, you could easily swap out its solid-state drive. So, looking at it today, this machine remains a strong competitor. However, the Ally X, as its second generation upgrade, significantly improved its memory and battery capacity. Specifically, its RAM was officially upgraded to 24 gigabytes. In addition, it boasts a sleek black finish. These enhancements collectively lead to a price difference of approximately 2,000 yuan, establishing it as a more premium device. It genuinely leaves you with the feeling that the second generation doesn't really demonstrate sufficient commitment. So, regarding the pricing, I truly hope Lenovo can establish a suitable price point. If the price is appropriate, I will certainly purchase it this time. However, based on my previous experiences, Lenovo's pricing has never been notably a pricing strategy that provides excellent value for money. One can still certainly hope for that, right? Naturally, due to time limitations, I haven't yet managed to create the Steam OS and teardown videos. Once I've completed my current tasks, I'll set aside some time to produce a new video for all of you. I genuinely hope to have the opportunity to share even more with you all. Alright, thank you very much everyone.